This pandemic has caused our leaders to draw from the expertise of many different groups of people. On today's show, we'll hear from a small business owner that was pulled into an advisory role for Governor Whitmer regarding the COVID-19 crisis. I'm Lisa Ellen Smith, and this is Focus on Business. We have Brian Calley from the Small Business Association of Michigan with us. And Brian, I think it's fair to say that you're more of a co-host these days than a guest, so regular contributor to Focus on Business. Thank you for your time. You're going to be back with the latest news and updates with us. And we also have Milan Gandhi, owner of MedShare. So Milan, I'd like to start with you. You have a fascinating company, but you also have quite a role that you've been playing for the state of Michigan since COVID-19 took hold here. Tell us first, what is MedShare? What is your business?
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, MedShare is a mobile diagnostic imaging and medical practice management company based out of Southfield. We've been in business now, this is our 40th year. It's a family business started by my father, and we have about 110 employees doing everything from mobile imaging services to managing physician practices and kind of everything in between.
So you actually take imaging machines to different practices and supply that service?
That's right. We go to doctors' offices predominantly, but also some hospital, satellite sites, as well as into patient homes.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations, and thank you for being here. The reason that I wanted to have you on this show is because you have been a part of the Michigan Economic Recovery Council, sort of a task force for Governor Whitmer, who invited many business leaders in the state of Michigan. How did you and your business get involved in that seat? Brian, did SBM have any role in that?
Well, as you can see from the professionalism of Milan Gandhi, that he's a rock star small business owner. He also happens to be the chair of the board of directors of the Small Business Association of Michigan. And as the Michigan Economic Recovery Council was being formed, it's mostly filled with very large companies, and also a seat that was really designated for the Small Business Association of Michigan. And who better than the chair of our board of directors? And he's provided some great leadership and insight, a small business perspective, and in a group that is playing a very pivotal role in the reopening of Michigan. So, Milan, as you have started, or you've been involved in this literally since the very beginning, the day one of the formation of the Michigan Economic Recovery Council, or MERC for short, as we call it. Maybe give us a little insight of what MERC has done in the past before we start talking about the role that it's currently playing.
Yeah, Brian, the MERC, we got together right in the beginning of April. The governor sort of impaneled a group of business leaders. There are CEOs from the largest corporations in Michigan that are on this committee. The CEO of General Motors, Case, Herman Miller, Lear, Meyer, Barton Mallow, all companies we know and leaders we've heard of. And then SBAM has a seat as well. What we focused on at first was understanding the data, public health data. We were receiving information from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, as well as some analysis of that data from the University of Michigan Public Health Department. They gave us information on where the disease was spreading, how it was spreading, what types of populations. The state was broken into 8 regions, so we got some regional data and analysis. And so the first couple meetings were just sort of digesting the data, as well as thinking about a framework for how do we reopen the economy. We analyzed that from several different angles, geography being one of them, but industry being another, as well as the types of businesses that have customers coming in and out of the door and the types of businesses that don't. So the nature and risk stratification of the businesses. So that's kind of where we started and went through a process of documenting a set of recommendations to the governor.
So we saw that process play out in real time early, right away with construction, for example, and manufacturing, as people saw those being the first industries to come back online or be given granted permission to come back online outside of the critical infrastructure, the essential businesses from the very, very beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. And so it may not have been obvious to people on the outside that really that was a set of recommendations from the Michigan Economic Recovery Council, which you're a part of, in giving giving the information. Here's how you reopen safely to the governor, and then seeing that adopted. How closely, now that you've seen this play out, how closely have the recommendations from the council tracked with what the rules that the governor came out with in terms of permissions?
Yeah, so from the beginning, our recommendations were, policy and data driven. We were focused on how, if you're going to reopen construction, here's how you do it. And Barton Mallow is, the CEO of Barton Mallow, Ryan Maibach, is one of the members of the council, and he led that subcommittee on construction. The CEO of Meyer, Rick Keys, led a subcommittee on retail and et cetera. And we came up with industry-specific recommendations. And if you look at the governor's executive orders and you look at our written recommendations that we submitted to her and presented to her, there are almost no differences. She really did take our recommendations almost verbatim in most cases and publish them as her, within her executive orders. The only things I would say would be different would be the timing. In certain cases, the MERC gave recommendations on timing of certain changes and industries that can go back to work and regions that can go back to work. And the governor at times has taken her own timing. And I think that, speaks to the input she's getting from the public health side of the house.
Sure, and of course we've heard a lot from business owners, some frustration with just the timing of things, and maybe moving a little slower than other states. But clearly we're in the reopening mode now. We've seen now after construction and then manufacturing, some retail allowance, and then in the northern Michigan. The northern Michigan sectors, they moved a little more quickly into bars and restaurants being opened at a limited capacity. And then, of course, we see this past week the retail statewide coming online with some capacity limitations, and bars and restaurants in very, very short order to be given the green light as well. Any thoughts or insights you might be able to provide? And now that the Recovery Council has provided all of those recommendations to the governor's office and the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, the regulatory agency, and a lot of different industries, including the ones that haven't been green lighted quite yet. What's the role of the council now? Does it continue? What are you guys up to today?
So good question. So what I will say is that as an example of the nuance of this, a few weeks ago, right before Memorial Day weekend, the governor asked the chairman of our committee, Jerry Anderson, who's also the chair of the board, DTE Energy, and she asked Jerry, hey, what do you think about regionalizing some of the policy that we're putting out? Prior to that, if you'll recall, prior to Memorial Day weekend, everything that the governor did with respect to executive orders was statewide. First, a stay-at-home order and closure of most businesses, and then as she reopened industries, construction, manufacturing, and otherwise, they were all statewide orders. And then she asked, what do you think about regionalizing? And we had been sort of recommending all along a regional approach to this, because within the state of Michigan, every region's a little different. And certainly the Upper Peninsula had the least number of cases, which is region 8 in our diagram. And region 6 being sort of the northern tip of the mitt part of the lower peninsula, had really the lowest number of cases and lowest spread of disease. And so basically, long story short, Jerry Anderson said, yeah, those two regions need to go and can safely go according to what we're seeing, and here's how you do it. And again, set of recommendations. You saw the very next day, the governor released her next executive order allowing the Upper Peninsula and region 6, tip of the mitt, Traverse City region to go back to work, and restaurants and bars and things like that. So we're seeing a lot of cooperation with the governor and that kind of thing. Going forward, what the MERC is doing now, because we've already made our recommendations. I mean, when, some of the highest risk stuff like, restaurants in Detroit, let's just say, when those reopen, and they will one day, and it's probably not so far off, next week, I believe, at half capacity, and then, going forward from there. Well, the next thing is that we as business owners and business leaders know that business won't survive and won't thrive if customers don't feel comfortable coming to the businesses. So the next phase of the MERC is that we are now embarking on a marketing campaign where we're going to be hiring a marketing consultant, vendor to put out an advertising and marketing campaign, probably mostly digital, maybe a little bit of TV, that will advertise to the citizens of Michigan what businesses are doing to keep them safe as customers and why it's safe for them to return to stores and restaurants and office buildings and other public venues. And eventually down the road, sporting events and concert venues, mass gathering type of situations. So the idea is now the MERC is going to take a leadership role on educating the public on what they can do to stay safe and why returning to businesses as customers will be safe. We're trying to drive the regrowth of business in Michigan.
That's excellent, because we SBM just got a survey back. It was out in the field and for the past week, and we saw in that survey that there was an expectation among small businesses very broadly of a severe reduction in the amount of sales activity and profitability in their businesses, and part of that is just a matter of what do you have to do to win your market back. And so that proactive approach, and not just assuming people are going to believe it's okay, but to explain, show them why, pull back the curtain and explain why it's okay. Here's what business is doing to make sure that our customers are safe, that our employees are safe. And so you can come back to work with confidence. You can re-engage with the economy with confidence, and that will absolutely be necessary, especially when you consider what small businesses are anticipating in terms of sales and losses over the next year.
And that's really my role on the MERC, is to make sure that all the policy and all the analysis that we do as business people takes into account the needs of small businesses. I give this example frequently. When there was the construction subcommittee on return to work, one of the thoughts that was tossed around was, hey, for a construction site, maybe it's just a good idea to have a physician on site. That way, we can take care of any symptomatic employees right away and that sort of thing. And yeah, it's a cost, but it's just one per construction site. And I raised my hand and said, well, hang on a second. There are lots of small business owners in Michigan who run construction companies that may have 2 to 10 employees and certainly couldn't afford that. So some dose of reality, practical stuff was required to make sure that the policy that the MERC put out didn't unduly disadvantage small businesses. But the other side of it is you've seen the governor take a lot of more aggressive action over the last 2-3 weeks with respect to opening up regions and business types. And over the next 2 to 4 weeks, you're going to see a lot of that data come back to us. And that's really what the MERC is looking at now, is how do these governors basically increasing the risk level. When you open more businesses and more regions, you increase risk. Now the question is how much, and a risk-free environment is not possible. So how do we get to a tolerable level of risk? And it's a little bit of feeling around in the dark. You introduce more risk, you see what it does to health and wellness and disease spread. And then you introduce a little more and you study it as you go. So the MERC will be doing a great deal of analysis on that in partnership with the University of Michigan Public Health to see what happened up north Memorial Day weekend. Was there mass spread of disease or was it manageable and contained, given the safety practices that are in place right now?
Well, that was going to be my question, actually, because there's a lot of speculation about what's going to happen as things reopen. And I think that that's what consumers are most worried about as well. So it's nice to know that there's somebody looking out for the state and watching those numbers, but also on behalf of small businesses. It made so much sense to me that landscape companies and greenhouses and things like that could could go out and mow, and so I presume that that's the small business representation on that advisory council. Well, thank you so much for being here. Very much appreciate it, and wish you the very best of luck as you navigate your way on the advisory council and also for your business.
Thank you, Lisa. And the last thing I'll say is we all have to stay vigilant. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, wear a mask when you can, because the one thing that can make this new introduction of risk into our situation less successful is if people get complacent with safety and sanitation habits. So we all need to stay vigilant, and that will be a part of the Merck's advertising campaign, is to keep people vigilant on staying safe.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good to hear.
Lisa.
So there's been some other news, Brian, I think you're probably up on, and that is that the Senate now has passed the PPP forgiveness requirements relaxation. Last week we talked on the show about the House had passed it. The Senate has now passed it. I think we should revisit that conversation and tell us what this is. And really, it was somewhat of a monumental passage here that happened.
It really was. We're very pleased with this. So as the Paycheck Protection Program rolled out, it became very clear that the period of time that businesses were to be closed down was a lot longer than what was originally assumed when the Paycheck Protection Program was designed. So that was meant to cover 8 weeks of payroll. And as we see that many businesses are going to be closed down for upwards of 3 months or perhaps more for the types of businesses around bigger gatherings of people, those businesses looked at it and said, what does that really do? So I get 8 weeks of payroll, but then I'm still going to have to close right down after that. Why don't you let me stretch it out longer in order to use that to ramp back in as the government gives wider permissions? And that's what Congress responded to. So
I want to just break in here a second, Brian, because the important thing for an owner to know is that 8-week period starts the day you get your loan. So that's right. That's a really important day. If you're trying to protect your business and you got your numbers together and you got a banker you could get on the line and you got your loan in the door, regardless of what kind of business you were, the minute it hit your bank account, 8 weeks start. So if you're an event management company or a restaurant, that doesn't make any sense at all, that timeline, right? So I just wanted to point out for people that's really an important thing.
So what it does is it gives you, instead of 8 weeks to spend on payroll, rent, mortgage, and mortgage interest or any kind of debt interest and utility payments, you now have up to 24 weeks that when you spend it on those qualified expenses over the course of 24 weeks, you can get forgiveness for that period of time. It doesn't give you more money, but it says that you could get the money and you could wait to spend it until you're closer to a point of reopening, or match up the amount that you're paying in payroll with the amount of business that you currently have. So that's a big change. They also changed some flexibility in what you can spend the money on. So before, it said you had to be 75% payroll and no more than 25% on those other overhead costs of rent and interest and utilities. But what they've said now is it can be 60-40. So 60% has to be on payroll, and 40% can be on those other issues. So those are the two big changes. You have more time to expend the money during the forgiveness period, and you have more flexibility in the mix of what you spend the money on. A couple other things too is that if you have some unforgiven portion left at the end that you don't spend on qualified expenses, that's a 1 minute loan or a 1% loan it converts into, but instead of being 2 years, it's over 5 years. Now that's a 1% loan over 5 years. Well, that's not a bad deal. So a lot of good changes. We're really pleased with how the Congress responded to that.
That was, and it also passed in both the House and the Senate overwhelmingly. Is that correct?
It did. So this had a lot of great bipartisan support across the board in the House and the Senate. And the White House has been very supportive right along the way. So we know that it has President Trump's support as well. So it will be signed into law. If not by the time this is aired, it might be already. But I think that people can move forward and be confident that these rules are changing and they have more flexibility now.
Yes, and I should probably mention that we tape this on Thursday and it airs on Sunday, so lots could happen. I want to just pull forward some numbers that we have not talked about on the show before, and that is that 113,487 Michigan businesses have gotten a Paycheck Protection loan. That's about $15.7 billion. That's going to help Michigan's economy quite a bit. I do want to quickly, though, move forward to this hidden stimulus inside of this CARES Act. Can you just take a minute and talk that through?
One thing that business owners ought to do is look at what they've done with carry forward of net operating losses. In the past, it's been limited. You can't carry forward all of it. With the CARES Act that passed, you can actually take losses from 2018, 19, or 20 and carry them backward to previous years where you had income and get immediate refunds. So something you ought to talk to your CPA about, especially if you've experienced losses in 2018, 19, or expect it in 2020.
I think we're going to need to have more on that in a future show. Thank you again for being here, Brian. And we will all see you all next week.
Michigan's unemployment rate is expected to reach 24% soon. Hundreds of thousands of new unemployment claims are being filed every week, and not all of those are legitimate. We have also seen fraudulent unemployment claims reach an all-time high. What's happening is the employee will either come from their work-at-home environment or go home, they'll open the mailbox, and in there is a letter from the unemployment office with a determination of payment. And they're like, "What? I didn't know I was laid off." So they're going to report it to the employer. Now, what we've seen recently is multiple employees at an organization all at the same day or during the same time frame all receiving this letter, which means the fraudsters are attacking individuals working at that organization. They've got information about the company, about the employee, they've got their social security number, their home address, and those types of things. So where did that information come from? Was it stolen from the employer? Was it stolen from the unemployment office? Likely not either of those. It was likely stolen from other places, like major breaches that have occurred that would have revealed social security numbers. The attackers will link that information with a name, with an email address, with place of employment, and all kinds of other information that's been stolen over time. And that allows them to file these fraudulent claims. So what do we do? The employer has a responsibility or can take the responsibility to file a fraud alert or file a fraudulent claim with the unemployment insurance office. The employee can also take that step. The employee is the one that's actually been attacked. They've had their identity stolen. So they need to take steps. They need to file or place a credit freeze on their credit reports with the 3 major credit reporting agencies if they haven't done that. I encourage everyone to do that, even if you haven't had an issue with this. Beyond that, they can file a fraud alert with those credit agencies. Now, the freeze needs to occur at each agency. The fraud alert, if you do it once, then they will tell the other agencies. The fraud alert, however, expires in 90 days, and which is not good, because that your private information is out there and someone is using it to steal your identity. They will do other things. They will try and open bank accounts. They will try and open credit accounts. They will try and get cell phone accounts or other things with this information. So employees and employers need to be on the alert for this activity, this fraudulent activity. take the right steps. If it gets bad, file a police report, but at least do those things with credit reporting agencies. If you're going to file a police report, do it with your local PD, state police post, sheriff, or whoever's in your area.
Focus on Tech, brought to you by Providence, making technology easier.
This is Denise Policella. Today on Focus on Legal, we tackle the unruly customer. You know the type. The rules just don't apply to these people. And even though a tiny fraction of the customers that come onto your property don't wear a mask because they physically can't, the vast majority of people who refuse to wear a mask and go out into public places and into businesses are making some sort of statement. So what do you do right now when you're legally required to protect your employees, your other customers in your business from a COVID-19 outbreak, but you have to deal with people who just refuse to follow the rules? Well, in this circumstance, your legal option of requiring them to leave and showing them out is probably not your first or best option. You don't want to have angry confrontations, and you don't want the PR backlash and even the potential civil rights lawsuit. We just really don't know legally what's going to happen yet. So your best option at this point is probably to hire a security guard, or if you already have one, that would be their job, to sit at the front entrance of your place of business, give the COVID screening questions, and offer people a complimentary disposable mask. Most people will take some out of a sense of obligation or just because they want to enter the store. And then if they refuse, you have the choice of having the security guard who's already trained to deal with this type of person, ask them to leave, or just let them enter. If you can't afford a security guard, or if just not practical for some reason, you might just have to deal with this for a while. And what you would need to do is just make sure that you are taking all the other precautions to protect your employees and staff, like distancing, sneeze guards, other protective equipment, regular sanitization. And then if a specific circumstance does come up where you're questioned about this by a customer or an employee, definitely consult with a licensed Michigan attorney and stay safe.
Focus on Law, brought to you by Policella and Associates, PLLC.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next Sunday.